lab and academics. And so what happens is that academics and industrial people tend to work on different sides of different problems. And so what happens is that the projects and perspectives of one of these groups sometimes isn't always considered to be important by the other group. To some extent, that's appropriate. I think that industrial scientists and academic scientists really shouldn't be working on the exact same things. But sometimes the disparity gets really bad. And in the battery field in particular, I've never seen a field that it's so bad as in the battery field. So just one example, the academics, at least until the last year or two, exclusively focus on gravimetric energy density, even though they say they're interested in the auto industry as their customer. Even though the auto industry hardly cares about gravimetric energy density, they only care about volumetric energy density. And an example of this is there's a big battery 500 program. The goal is 500 watt hours per kilogram. Most car companies aren't particularly interested in that compared to volumetric energy density. And you can see the reason. Imagine you have a Tesla Model 3, and suppose that you reduce the weight, the mass of the batteries by 10%. So that'll save around 20 to 30 kilograms, maybe 1%, 2% in the range. Nobody's ever going to buy or not buy a car because of a 10% improvement in gravimetric energy density. If you improve the volumetric energy density by 10%, that's 100 liters. 100 liters is big enough so that you can give each passenger an extra inch of knee room, an extra inch of headroom. You can make the trunk bigger. You can give the car company more space under the car so that they can more efficiently package all the mechanicals. You could make the car a little shorter on the outside and keep the same size on the inside. There's a lot of things that a way you can benefit from a volumetric energy density improvement. The academic world more or less has simply refused to get interested in that until the last year or so. And the third big difference, I think, biggest difference is getting your work into the real world. So it's possible to be a professor and get your work into the world. It's rare and it's not your job. If you're in a company, you're going to be doing that a lot. That's what you're supposed to be doing, and that's where your skill set is. So in thinking about where you want to go, you can keep some of these factors in mind. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a whole bunch of contrasts between what it's like in academia and in industry from the point of view that I have. So the first question is, why did you get hired? If you got hired by a university, mainly they're interested in two things. One is you can bring in money. The other is you're going to become famous. Yeah, it's nice if you're a good teacher, but basically you bring in money, you become famous, and it's okay. And it's not even necessary to become famous in the field you're in. If you're hired to be a battery scientist, but 7 years in, you're bringing in $10 million a year as the world's greatest volcano expert, you probably get tenure. In industry, you're hired because they're trying to solve a company-specific problem or set of problems. And it's not clear that there's really any overlap in these two. How do you measure success? In academia, Nature papers, your H-index, how many invited talks did you get? How many academic awards did you get? Are you at a prestigious university? Those are sort of the typical measures of success. In industry, you're successful if you solved company problems, and if you become known in the company as the corporate expert on some important problem. And again, there's really very little overlap here. And so you should think about what it is that appeals to you. Collaborations in academia, they're kind of optional. A lot of people collaborate. If you're collaborating as a brand new young faculty member, you need to keep in mind that demonstrating your independence is important. So if you are on a lot of proposals that get funded, you want to be the PI, not just the co-PI on some of them. Or if you're just the co-PI, you should be clear exactly what your area of leadership is. And if you walk around as a young faculty and it seems like you really need a lot of help, that could be suicide. Another related factor is the allocation of credit, which is sort of the coin of the realm in academia. And it's become so critical and so finely divided that you can have two, I've even seen three, quote, first authors. And so credit is so important. So being the first author is probably better than being the second first author, and that's probably better than being the third first author. And then you get a certain amount of credit for being the last author, and you get a different amount of credit for being the corresponding author. And maybe being the eighth author out of 9 is different from being the sixth author. Anyway, credit is very critical, very different in industry. In the first place, collaboration is absolutely required, especially if you're young, because there's just no way a young employee is going to solve any kind of industrial problem on their own. And in fact, if you show too much independence, that's suicide. And the reason is that teamwork is the most efficient and often the only way to actually solve industrial problems. And that's, I'll talk about this later, but industrial problems are just much more complex and that you need a lot more skill sets. As far as credit, it's, the exact opposite. If you're in a room with your boss and your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss, whoever's the highest level manager in the chain takes all the credit for everything done by everybody below that highest boss. And that's fine because no one except your direct boss actually has to know that you are the one who solved the problem. And that's because your direct boss runs your life. So whenever you have the chance, you give credit to your boss. And in exchange, if your boss has got any brains, your boss is going to get you more funding and more independence and will shield you from corporate politics and blame. Why? Because you just made your boss look good and your boss is thinking, I want to do more of that. So let's get Steve more funding and maybe he'll make me look good again. If you want to succeed in a company, you need to be talking not just to your fellow researchers, but to people throughout the company who are perhaps involved in other parts of the process. Maybe you need to be in touch with people who are doing the manufacturing. This sort of internal networking collaboration is an important pathway to success. Okay, you need political skills to survive in science. If you're in academia, you're basically your own boss. You bring in your own money. You don't have to kiss up to your department head, really. But the political requirements in order for you to advance your career has to do with how you are seen by your academic community. And it's your job to convince the community that your idea is the best idea so that your idea gets the most citations and you get the most people following along with what you're doing. In industry, I've put this in red because it's so much more important than anything else that I'm going to say today. Your boss determines whether or not you are happy. And therefore, your political skills are aimed at one object and one object only. Convince your boss that you're going to make him or her look good to his or her boss. Your boss likes you, you have a great career. Your boss doesn't like you, you better leave. So that's sort of a different kind of political skill. Now, suppose that you want to bring a new technology to market. So technology transfer is hard, and it's harder than most people recognize. For sure, it doesn't just happen by itself. And the reason is that you come up with some cool new technology, if you want to get it implemented, that means you have to displace the old technology. And there is going to be people who've devoted their lives to promoting the old technology and who don't want anything new. And you're going to get this new technology in over, excuse me, over their dead bodies. So in particular, writing a paper or a report isn't going to get new technology anywhere. Now, if you're in academia, the best way to get technology into the market is to create a startup. And you have people like Yeming Chang and Yitsui, and these guys are champions at doing that. And actually, startups have become, in the last, I'd say, 20 to 30 years, a critical part of the entire R&D ecosystem. What happened is, if you go back more than 30 years, let's say to the 1980s, every decent-sized company had an R&D group or an R&D division that was centrally funded, and its goal was to keep the company updated on the latest technology and also to provide new technologies to the company. And this kind of model, which I guess started in probably the 40s, lasted until the 80s, and then it failed. And so in the last 30 or 40 years, most big companies have either shut down or drastically reduced the size of their R&D, or they've made R&D a part of product development. And so what that means is that companies no longer have such a simple pipeline from academia, where a lot of great ideas come from, into the company. And so, and it also is a problem, how does the company itself evaluate new technology? And maybe you see some of this the way GM went after Nikola. So that's why, so nowadays when big companies want new technology, it's likely that they're simply going to buy a startup or license something from a startup. Now, in industry, if you want to bring it to market, and I've referenced this before, you need to champion the technology within the company, whether it's yours or whether it's the suppliers that you want to promote. And this is going to require intra-company networking skills. You're going to have to convince the other people in the company that your idea is good enough so that they should stop doing what they're already doing and do something new. And it may even require that you have to transfer out of research, at least temporarily, into manufacturing or some other division to get it done. And if you don't, then the idea will languish and you won't get the pleasure of seeing your idea brought to market. If your employer wants to reward you, then no matter where you are, they can always give you a better salary. Other than that, if you're in academia, well, you can get promoted to a full professor. If you're really good, you get a chaired professor. And if you're really, really good, they may even reduce the amount of administrative duties that you have, and that's your reward. In industry, the reward is you get promoted to a supervisory role. So maybe when you're brand new, you're at the bench and you're doing your own experiments, and then you get promoted to be a group leader where you might have 5 or 10 people that are reporting to you, and you run the group, and these are experienced PhDs and technicians. So what that means is you actually get more administrative duties compared to what you had before. In exchange, you get a seat at the table as the company decides on future directions. You have an influence because now you're, even as a group leader, you're part of the management structure, and they're looking for your advice on what directions to go. And part of the way you get influence is that you have a big say on the people that are hired for your group, and that's going to have a long-term impact on the company. And really, the reward from your employer, the biggest reward is to see your ideas come to fruition. And I think this is really a major reason for going into industry. Running groups. In academia, the professor has a group And the professor's job is to provide guidance. But the real goal of the group is to train the students to become independent. The student, by the end, the student should be an independent researcher. And maybe the student typically spends 4 or 5 or 6 years in the group. And for a lot of that time, the student is in a learning mode. And so, maybe only the last year or two is the student actually producing useful data or analysis. But that's fine because the student is getting trained, and that's really the fundamental reason for the existence of this group in some ways. The professor, in addition to running the group, has a lot of other commitments that don't benefit or may have nothing to do with the group. So for example, the professor is teaching, consulting, traveling. The professor is a journal editor. The professor is on external and internal panels. These are all things that benefit the professor, benefit the institution, and may or may not actually benefit anybody in the group. But again, that's fine. It's not the professor's job to hold the hand of the people in the group. People in the group are supposed to become independent. It's very different in industry. Again, the group leader is providing guidance, but solving the problem now is the goal. So consider 2 cases. There's a student who comes to the professor and says, Professor, I don't know how to solve this problem. The professor is likely to say, well, here's a book, here's some papers, go read it and figure it out. In industry, there isn't time for that. And so if you're the group leader and you know the answer, what you're going to do is you're going to say, well, here's the answer. Here's some books. When you get a chance, next month, take a look at the book so the next time you know how to solve the problem. So your mentoring or your guidance as a group leader is different from your mentoring and guidance as a professor. In research, the typical turnover may be 10 years or 20 years. There's no particular reason for people to rotate through different groups. And so the result is that the group members become experts. So they're much more efficient typically than academic groups. And this is so the group's purpose is to solve problems as opposed to getting trained. Also in industry, the group leader is focused on his or her group. There's none of this other stuff that professors are involved in. That's another difference. How do you get funded? In academia, most people, I think, are funded by government. There's some corporate funding. This works pretty well. There's one special challenge if you're in academia, and that is if you need to get equipment, large equipment, that can be a challenge, especially in a new area. So you go to a university, you get a startup package, you buy your $800,000 piece of equipment, you use it for 5 or 10 years, and you say, you know what, I'd like to move into a new area. I need another $800,000. So how do you get that? You can apply to NSF or apply to somebody, but it's a little challenging, I think, because you're competing against people who are experts in the field, in that new field. You don't know anything about that new field, maybe, and the reviewers never heard of you. So that's a challenge. In industry, the funding is often internal, and there are 2 flavors of internal funding, and it's very important if you go to a company that you understand which flavor of internal funding that company does, because your life will be very different. So the old model, which is still in existence occasionally, is central funding, where the CEO says, okay, I'm going to allocate 3% or 8% of revenue or something to an R&D group. And you, the R&D group, you're responsible for serving the entire company. In order to get this 3% or 5% or whatever, I have to tax the entire rest of the company. So um, they're paying for you, so you need to serve the entire company. The other model is direct funding. So for example, there could be a product development division or a manufacturing division or a design division, and any one of them in this model can go to research and say, okay, we have a problem. We think you guys can solve it. So you three guys are on our payroll for the next 3 years to solve this. And so in that way, um, that's called direct funding. Each of these models has their own advantage. The advantage of direct funding is that you ensure that the work that R&D is doing will actually benefit somebody. It's not sort of pie in the sky stuff that you claim should benefit somebody. It actually is, because product development is actually paying for this work out of their own budget. The disadvantage of direct funding is that the operating divisions tend to have an extremely short time horizon. And it may be that it's 1 year, or maybe it's 2 years. And so the result is that there is nobody in the corporation who's thinking about 5 years or 10 years into the future. And so that's the argument. And so different companies have different come down with different ratios of these two kinds of funding, but it's going to matter to you which kind your company does in terms of your career. Now, industry can also get government funding. Um, it sounds like that's always good because money coming in should be good. It's maybe undesirable if it means sharing the intellectual property, but more important usually is that if you are working on a government paid project, then your responsibility is to that project. And presumably that project was supposedly aligned with your company, but sometimes your project may, the project may force you to move away from what your company is interested in. And so a lot of companies don't like that. And so they don't want their people taking government money. As far as getting new equipment, it's sort of a different mindset. If, if, if you're working on one area and maybe your company says, we're not interested in that area anymore. We want you to work in this other area. And so you say, okay, but I'm going to need $800,000 worth of equipment. Well, then the company has to buy you the equipment, because if they want, assuming you can make a case, if that's what they want to do, then they have to pay for it. And so you don't see in industry, at least in large companies, people who are desperately trying to get the equipment that they need. If they need it, the company will buy it. Otherwise, they didn't really need it. Now, what projects are you going to work on? And in academia, you can divide all professors into two categories. Category one, you're a famous professor at a top university, and then you work on whatever the hell you want to work on. And category two is you're not a famous professor at a top university, and then you work on what the funding agencies tell you to work on. I think there's sometimes a perception that if you're a professor, you can do whatever you like, and sometimes you can, but most often you're following what the funding agencies tell you. Now, that still gives you a lot of freedom sometimes, but one example is in 2009, DOE's electrochemistry funding was going almost all to fuel cells. And then Obama came in and Steve Chu came in, and Steve Chu said, okay, that's it for fuel cells. It's all going to batteries. So, all the fuel cell people had to get jerked around. Maybe they had to relabel their fuel cells and call them batteries for a year or two, but eventually they have to actually do what the funding agency tells you. In companies, there's no question. You work on what your company tells you to work on. Or at least you work on what is important for your company. And what's interesting if you're in R&D, is that, the company probably doesn't really know what's important in 5 or 10 years. Think of all of the auto companies, all of the legacy auto companies that over the last 10 years never bothered really with electric cars. Or if you go back 10 years before that, other than Toyota, none of the car companies really bothered with hybrid cars. And I think what happened in both of those cases is the companies didn't have or didn't rely on far-sighted people who were telling them your business model may change, may have to change. So, so you're in R&D. So the best thing you can do, and this is best if you're centrally funded, is to figure out what the company is going to need in 5 years or 10 years and make sure your company is protected or not blindsided or can take advantage of this new technology. So how do you figure that out? And there's only one good way, as far as I can tell, and that's networking. So you wander around the halls of your corporation in all the different divisions, and you make friends, and you talk to each person and you say, well, what do you think is going to be coming down the line in 5 or 10 years? And you collect all this information. And now you have a list, and you sort it, and you say, all right, these are the best ideas I can find for what the company is going to need. Which projects should I work on? And the first thing is you look for projects where you have some expertise. And unfortunately, you have no expertise in any of them. And so now your move is you say, well, based on the people I've talked to, this is the most important project, and I'm simply going to have to learn from scratch how to be a contributor in that area. And it may take you a year or two to get up to speed, but that's what you have to do. In order to be able to do this, you have to have a certain amount of independence. And the way to get more independence is you were successful on your last project and you made your boss look good. By the way, your boss is in some way responsible for figuring out what you should be doing. That's a big burden. So if you go to your boss and you say, hey, I have an idea what I should be working on, your boss is likely to be very grateful and give you a lot of independence because your boss doesn't want to be responsible. If you show the independence, you end up having a lot of freedom. You need to come up with a project that you can justify, but given that, you may be able to work on almost anything you want. Technical communication is quite different. In academia, I think everything should be published. My rule from the days in graduate school, if it didn't get published, it never happened. That's pretty simple. In industry, it's more complicated. You have typically in a fairly large company, you have internal reports, and you can write these reports and email them to everyone in the company that you think might be interested. This is called throwing the report over the wall because it lands in the mud and nobody will ever look at it. So if you actually did something that you think is useful, you need to go to the people who can implement it, maybe the manufacturing people, maybe the design people, maybe the product development people. You got to go there and you got to convince these people this is what they want to do. Another area where internal reports is important in companies is the reports become part of institutional memory. And that's because, especially in large companies, there's a lot of turnover. Not only if people leave the company, but people who were working on one project, they may move to a very different project after a few years. And so it could be that a problem is showing up that was already solved 5 years ago. And somebody in the company needs to remember that. And maybe that's part of R&D's function. Now, when I was working in companies, it was very important to me to be able to publish. And depending on how you feel, if this is important to you, you need to think long and hard about this issue because you have to answer this question. why in the world would any company encourage or even permit you to publish externally? From their point of view, not only are you revealing whatever research you've learned, um, but you're spending time preparing the manuscript and you're spending time um, making the reviewers happy. And maybe that doesn't really benefit the company. And so what I did during my career was I came up with a number of arguments that held some sway and allowed me to publish for the most part. And the single most powerful argument had to do with hiring. So I'm in a company and I'm doing ceramics, and I've never published in the last 10 years, but now my boss says, go hire the best ceramics guy you can. So what do I do? Well, I remember from 10 years ago, there was this guy at MIT who was really a big shot, but that guy's retired, and I don't really know who's up because I haven't been involved. But I look around and I find these three professors seem to be pretty good. So I write them, or maybe I meet them at a meeting and I say, gee, I'd like to have lunch with you. We can talk about students. And they say, who are you? Why would I send one of my students to you? I've never heard of you. And maybe you're just a black hole. If you're publishing, then these people know you and they respect you. And when you talk to them, they're eager to talk to you because this is an outlet for their students that they can be proud of. And the same goes if you're trying to collaborate with academics. They have no interest in collaborating with people they've never heard of. Another benefit of going to conferences in particular, I found, is you can find out what's hot. I mean, you can look at the literature and you see, you read 10 articles and they're on 10 different subjects, but which is the one where the community actually thinks is where the brightest future is? And that's the sort of thing you pick up at a conference. You can also have some guidance to academia. If you're a company and you think a certain project is important, if you're publishing a lot and your group is publishing, then academics are going to look around and say, gee, that must be a useful area. We should get into it too. And so you can sort of deflect academia to work on projects that are important to you. And then there's the issue of secrecy. You got patents, you got trade secrets. Trade secrets are probably a lot more valuable because they don't leave the company. A patent, everything is disclosed. But I do want to say something about how industry and academia views patents, at least among my academic friends. So the general view I see is, hey, I thought of a really cool idea. I'm going to get a patent. I'm going to start a company and I'm going to get rich. And that happens. But almost all patents are worthless. Yet companies still put a lot of effort into building up what they call patent portfolios. And here's how that works. Toyota and Mercedes get into a room together, and Toyota says, Mercedes, you guys make the best steering wheels we've ever seen. I wish we could make steering wheels that good. And Mercedes says, well, yeah, we have a lot of patent protection for that. But we at Mercedes really admire your brake pedals. We think you make the best brake pedals. And we'd love to be able to make those. And Toyota says, well, we got a lot of patents around that. So the Mercedes lawyer and the Toyota lawyer get in a room, and the Mercedes lawyer says, I have 3.5 inches of patents on steering wheels. And the Toyota lawyer says, we have 3.5 inches of patents on brakes. So they say, okay, we'll cross license. And so the value of any one patent is 0, and nobody really cares what's in those patents. But building a patent portfolio can be valuable just in itself. I'm getting near the end. Academics try not to work on problems that are really complex because the goal in academia is to understand basic principles. Typically, the best way to do that is with a model system where you turn off a lot of the complexities in order to simplify things and understand it. That's a good way to go. But if you're in industry, model systems are nice, but they're not sufficient because in the real world, you simply can't turn off complexity. And so, you can go to academia and say, give me a model that has all the complexities, but then that never comes back. So you can say, I'm just going to try everything. That never happens. That takes forever. And so the right way for things to work is the academic work. All the academics have discovered that if you put fluorinated compounds into your electrolyte, you make a better SCI. So if I'm at a company, instead of trying to test every single chemical ever developed, I only have to do the fluorinated ones. So academic work can give clues to industry. These extraneous considerations or complexities are critical in companies, and they're the cause of a lot of miscommunication between academia and industry. So, for example, in industry, cost is very important, but it's system cost, not part cost. And a lot of times academics don't understand that. I know someone who was going around talking about a sensor that was only 1/10 of a cent per sensor, and why isn't the car companies using it, but didn't realize that every sensor needs 2 wires, and 2 wires costs $1 by the time you attach them. And then, you may solve a problem that's sounds really good, and you go to the factory and it turns out that the problem you solved isn't the slow step. So maybe you sped up a problem that was already fast, and so you wasted your time. And these are hard things to know and hard things to communicate between academia and industry. And changing jobs, if you're in academia, you want to be famous and well-funded, and you want to use the old boys network, old girls network. That tells me I better shut up very soon. In industry, if you want to leave, you need to keep it private, because if your company finds out you're looking for another job, they'll fire you because they figure you're going to a competitor. The nitty-gritty is to do great in your interview. That means you need to learn as much as possible about the company you're applying to convince them that you really care. And you never badmouth your previous employer, because they figure if you said something bad about your previous employer, you'll say something bad about your next employer. The critical step is to get an interview. And when I was at GM, I was handed 300 resumes and told to whittle it down to 10. And that's not really possible. But one of the people I actually knew, and that person got an interview. What will you work on in 10 years? In academia, probably the same thing. In industry, probably not. So this is a list of 7 different areas that I worked on for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years each. It looks like they have nothing to do with each other. One way you get very broad, one way you get very deep, and you can ask yourself which appeals to you. And I think this is the last one. Industry academia relationships are not always successful. They usually benefit the professor, because the professor gets the money with little or no recourse if the professor gets sidetracked or doesn't deliver anything. Benefits to the company is not so common, except for 2 exceptions. One is if there's a code the professor can provide. So for example, you have a CNC machine and there's a code that runs it and it's not working very well. Professor gives you a better code, it's drop in, now you're happy. Or if the professor is already working on exactly what your company needs. And when I say exactly, I mean exactly, because it's very easy to believe that you're going to deflect the professor to working on what you want if it's close, but that won't happen. So the real problem is that professors don't know about and don't really care about all the extraneous issues that you care about in companies, which is kind of appropriate. If you're a professor, you want a Nature paper, you want a step change, you want to have an impact that looks important. If you're a company, you can't do that, because almost all step changes don't go anywhere. You want a 2% improvement. And there's not that much overlap unless you're Jeff Don. Most professors don't care about a 2% improvement, but that's what companies want. And so companies fund professors. Sometimes relationships do work out well. Sometimes it's a reward, sometimes it's PR, sometimes the CEO went to Princeton, and that's the end of my talk. If you would like, I would be really happy to talk to any of you. You can contact me and we can chat about whatever questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think this talk is very fruitful and compact. I like your real case examples. It's really, the examples are really interesting and help us to understand. Yeah, I think it's very important to clear the goal, understand why we are hired and who we are working with and who we are working for, what we are working for. Yeah, and I think in our audience, some of them are, Yifei, Tao Gao, they are young professors, and we also have a lot of PhD students, postdocs, who are in their triad of choosing academia or industry. I think there are a lot of questions from the audience. So I think now we can, all the participants, you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. You can also raise questions in the chat box.
Okay, would you be able to read the chat box for me, or should I stop sharing?
Here's one participant says, "Great presentation, all truth. Thanks." That's a comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Steve. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, great presentation. I learned a lot, and about your experience in working in both industry and academia. So I just have one quick question. So, my understanding is that most people, they either choose to go to industry, and then or they either choose to go to academia, and there are very few people, at least that I know of, they have this kind of cross paths. But I guess this kind of cross paths might be a very good experience to have, because you can experience the culture and how people work and think in both academia and industry. This might help you to really identify important problems and develop skills or even network to solve them. So I'm not sure, like, what's your comments on that? What's your experience on that? Do you encourage young professionals to pursue a career path like this, or do you encourage people just to stick to whatever they have and don't leave?
Yeah. So let me be very blunt. As I said early on, academic jobs are where the prestige is. So if you're in academia, you don't want to go to industry because it's a step down in your own eyes. Now, sometimes you do because you didn't get tenure. So that direction is meager. The other direction is also meager, but for a different reason. If you've been in industry for 5 or 10 years and you want to go to a university, how are they going to evaluate you? They want to know if you can bring in funding. Well, if you were getting internal funding, you didn't do that. They may want to know if you can teach, but you've never had experience teaching. They want to know, how good is your research, but you haven't published much. And so going from industry to universities is hard. The best time to do that is in your first 5 or 6 years, when they can look at your grad student and postdoc research and say, well, this is still the same person and that was great, so we'll give them let them try. However, I think your point is extremely valid, and I think in the battery field more than any other field, I've been in a lot of fields. I've never seen a field where the intellectual disconnect between academia and industry is so wide. Another example, I gave you one on gravimetric and volumetric energy density. Another example is if you're in academia and you want to say your electrode is better than the other guy's electrode material, you talk about amp hours or milliamp hours per gram. Well, amp hours has absolutely no value to anybody. There's no reason outside the lab why anyone would ever care about amp hours unless you're an academic electrochemist. If you're in industry, you care about power, you care about energy, you don't care about amps. because if you don't know volts, amps is useless. You have, and yet, you know, you can't, okay, so if there were more crossover, you would see less of that kind of disconnect. You would see academics working on projects that industry cared about more, um, which I think is a real problem in the battery field, particularly.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really very insightful. You know, I agree that I guess it's important for to bridge industry with academia. So I guess maybe, but as you also described, it's kind of hard for people to jump across fields,
Yeah,
which is really sad. I guess if we have this kind of smaller barrier for people moving across, and we may have better opportunity to bridge industry with academia.
I agree.
Thank you.
I also have a question, Steve. So for people who already working in the industry, like because I agree with you, like in industry you cannot have too much publications, but I still see a lot of people who working like in Toyotas, like
Yeah,
they still have publications going out. I wonder
right.
like when and in what condition and in situations you choose
Yeah,
to publish paper instead of filing a patent.
yeah. So Toyota is a really interesting case. Toyota is famously closed mouth. You can never get them to talk about anything, but they do publish, and they've got a great research lab. And so I knew a guy at Toyota, and I kind of dragged him over to a corner where there were no listening devices. And I think he'd just written a paper maybe on magnesium batteries. And so I said, gee, I'm impressed that Toyota let you publish this. And I guess magnesium is an up and coming thing. And he said, no, Toyota, and this is 10 years ago, maybe they've changed, but he said, Toyota only lets people publish things that they know are going nowhere. He said,
Um,
the, um, the reason that they let me publish is that I wouldn't have gone to Toyota if they didn't let me publish. So Toyota's strategy is, okay, we'll hire these guys, we'll let them publish some on things that we have no interest in, and we think we're going to get our money's worth out of them by other stuff that they can't publish. So that's one model. You never know, but I think it's a very delicate situation, and I think if you want to hire the best people, companies better let you publish. You see that with Apple. Their AI. My son, who's in AI, tells me Apple can't hold a candle to a lot of other places um, because none of their people can publish. So the really good people won't go there.
yeah, this is so sad, but true. Yeah, I was wondering why. Yeah.
But I think
Mm.
I think there's good arguments. Like if you publish something, then you're going to get the attention of the rest of the battery community, let's say. And if you're right, then other people will support it. If you're wrong, it's better to find out. You know,
Mm.
uh, so there's reasons why they should let you publish.
Yeah, it's a learning and self-correction process.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But also, I think mainly it's if they want to hire the best people, if they if you don't publish, you're just not going to get the best people because the
Mm-hmm.
best people want to publish.
Yeah. Also, I have another question. So, regarding the differences between we writing research papers and writing patents, usually when we write patents, uh, that doesn't matter, like the author's the patent author sequence. Like you might not be
Right.
the first inventor, you might be the third or fourth inventor. How that will affect your career path? Do you
So
want to fight to become the?
no. I mean, the inside the company, you
Mhm.
don't care about credit except your boss. Your boss needs to know that it's because of you that this patent happened. And if your boss knows that and your boss likes you for that, that's all that matters. And um, you know, first, second, fourth, 12th doesn't matter. At least that's my experience.
Okay.
Of course, all my patents are worthless. So, you know, maybe if I'd had a patent that, you know, made $1 billion, then it would have mattered more. So I don't know.
You're too humble, Steve.
Well,
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the audience? You can feel free to unmute yourself to raise a question to Steve.
Hello. Hello, I'm Sarah Adeyani. I am from University of Houston. Thank you so much for your talk. Well, I have a question about your experience in national labs. I am very interested in the type of projects and research that is going on in national labs. I kind of follow the Oregon National Labs and Berkeley National Lab because they are working on lithium-ion batteries. And I want to know, what is your experience if you want to compare your work with the academia or industry, how we can compare that? And thank you so much. I would like to know that.
so, yeah, that's a good question. So the different national labs have different answers. And some of them, like Argonne and Berkeley, are more sort of academic oriented, and Idaho National Lab. Some of the others are more applied oriented. Berkeley is especially academic because it's right on the Berkeley campus. And so that's sort of unique. The national labs, their job is, I think, to interface, between academia and industry. And this is something that's really done well in the battery field, because the Department of Energy has very close relations with the auto industry. I used to be part of that. And so there is a lot of discussion among DOE, the auto industry, and the national labs about what are the important projects to work on. And then the national labs get very high, well, like Argonne, for example, you know, they get big budgets, they can do everything really well, and they listen to what the car companies say they want. And so I think it's in the battery field, and this is not so true in many other fields, but in the battery field, national labs have a very good environment. At Berkeley, you're evaluated largely on what you publish. That you don't get tenure. So at some point in your career, so at the national labs, you don't actually get a salary. You know, it's not like a normal job where you have a salary and then you get grants. At a national lab, you get grants, and out of that grant money, you pay yourself. So, you know, at some point you get to a certain age and they say, well, we're not renewing your grant anymore, and then you're now retired. So you don't get tenure. But it's especially at the the high profile labs like Argonne and PNNL, Oak Ridge, Berkeley, you can have a great career there, sort of straddling the difference. One thing to keep in mind is that because you're paying your salary out of your grant money, what that means is that for every $1 of grant money you think you're bringing in, you have to bring in about $3. So I mean, or said another way, if you bring in $100,000, only $40,000 of that is available to you to do research. The rest is paying your salary and paying overhead. In universities, it's sort of the other way around. So if you're at a national lab and you want to collaborate with a professor, they don't want to collaborate with you because you're so expensive. You know, there's all sorts of politics around that. But in the battery field, I think national labs, the big ones, occupy a very nice position, and it does allow you to go back to academia because you can publish.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Do we have more?
Yeah.
Hey.
Here.
Yeah.
Hi, Steve. Very, very wonderful sharing. I enjoyed a lot. So talking back about the battery field. So you already mentioned that it's huge. It's divided. It's huge divided. But some people say that in industry, the battery research actually much better than academia. How would you comment that, or how would you say how the academia research can really help or contribute in the industry or in this real this field?
So academia, well, first of all, academia invented lithium batteries. So you have to be very upfront. The whole field exists because of academia. But in the United States, funding really turned on in about 2009 or 2010. So it's been about 10 years. And I think you can make a case that in those 10 years, academic research has had almost zero useful impact on the battery field. And partly that's because academic battery people don't recognize what the important problems are. Part of it is they just are interested in problems that have no value, like there's been 40,000 papers on SCI. Well, that's a solved problem for most batteries. So is durability. Right now, I was talking to a friend of mine at Tesla, and I was asking him, what do you need? And he said, we really don't need anything. All our cells last 1,500 cycles. They're pretty safe. The only thing we need is cheap. And I said, well, don't you need cobalt free? Well, we got lithium iron phosphate. So I think the academic battery community has done a lot of interesting science. And as long as they advertise themselves as doing battery science, that's great. I don't think they've had, there's a few, Yeming Chang and Yi Sui, and, you can count on your fingers a few people, Gleb Yushin. There are people who've actually had an impact, but, it's not much. And another part of the reason is that every single major battery company spends each about 3 or 4 times as much as all of DOE spends each year. So how is DOE going to compete? So that's my own personal view, and maybe other people don't like that. But the science is great, and if your goal is to say I'm interested in ion transport in condensed media or something like that, then the academic battery field has done wonderful things. But if you actually ask, what has the academic battery field done for commercial batteries, it's pretty much zero, in spite of the fact that every Nature Materials paper claims that it's going into production next week. I've kind of got a jaundiced view of that, as you may have picked up.
So I have another follow-up question. So it seems like many people, or the majority now in industry, and in the battery field, working on lithium-ion battery, whatever, and different materials, cathode, but they're all lithium-ion batteries. So is there a chance still left for other type of batteries can potentially revolutionize this field?
Yeah.
People now talking about the cost and try their best to reduce the cost, to increase the energy density 5%, 10%, but seems like not revolutionary. So is there any, what do you think?
You just asked the right question, in my opinion, that every academic should ask himself. And that is, lithium batteries is a mature field. You're not going to do anything useful. Maybe you'll invent a new kind. All right. If you want to study, some extraordinary new type of battery, great. But, if you're just looking at NMC, Panasonic has already done everything you've done. And so really, in my opinion, academic people who are interested in this stuff either should say, my interest is in studying the physics, and I don't, if it has an application, fine. If it doesn't, fine. Or they should get out of the lithium battery field, start looking at other kinds of maybe different energy storage. Maybe lead acid batteries can, people are trying to make that work, or maybe zinc batteries or something. And it's just from an industrial point of view, I think lithium batteries is done. It's just making it cheaper, and professors don't know how to do that. That's my personal point of view.
Got you. Yeah,
I mean,
thank
they
you.
got 500 miles of range. There's still a problem with fast charging.
Mhm.
So if you could come up with but that's it as far as I can see. That's the only stumbling block left.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you.
I'm kind of blunt.
Any other questions? I think this is a very, very good opportunity to catch Steve.
No. Up there is my email address and my phone number. So,
Mhm.
you know, if you just want to sit and chat sometime, please give me a call.
Yeah, I think I know Steve from the battery branch. I think he's very, I think Steve is very active and open to share many of his experience and ideas. And I think, you know, many people, you're also very loved by a lot of young researchers. People say Steve is always very willing to guide and help young researchers, young people. So feel free to drop him email or give him a phone call.
Can I ask
Yes.
just a quick question?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about your own plan. So, what's your plan for the next 5 or 10 years for yourself? You're going to industry or going to academia, or you still think about it?
Okay, so I'm 71.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So what?
So, thank you. So, I mean, I'm having the time of my life at LBL now, and I have a very
good enough is 90 something, right?
I have a very kind of special position there, and I'm you know I'm happy. I'm gonna stay there until they throw me out.
Okay.
You know, at my age, I'm not interested in trying to make a new reputation. I am what I am. You know, I don't want to get hustle for funds. I'm just having fun. And actually, the most fun I have is talking to young scientists. It's not that I want to share my views with you. I already know my views, but I want to hear what you guys think. And, you know, gee, the best idea I've heard all day is, you know, what about other energy storage systems? Maybe we should stop thinking about lithium batteries. I think that's a great idea.
Oh,
but
thank
anyway, you know, I'd like to talk to you guys.
Yeah, great. I think a young generation also need your experience to be better.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ever offered me their experience, so I think people should do that.
Thanks. Great.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Steve.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you for doing this talk. It was really great. So I had a question, since you were mentioning that there should be some other new energy storage system. So like fuel cells and battery are often like a debate that, and I know like at some of the companies and even some smart people have said that it's like not a fuel cell but a fuel cell, and it's like the stations are not there and all those kind of stuff. And since you mentioned that lithium ion is like almost reaching to like a dead end, that okay, all that research has been done, everything is just a cost issue which needs to be probably tackled. So do you think that fuel cell, there would be a time when fuel cell reaches to that same commercialization and you see a lot of stuff happening? I know Toyota is like one company which is doing, but yeah, it's like still not up to that commercialization level. That so just wanted to
so
hear
by
your
the
thoughts.
way, I mean, I think there are people like Yeming Chang who's coming up with totally new battery concepts. That's what professors should be doing. I'm just saying that working on conventional lithium ion batteries, unless you're worried about fast charge, there's just nothing left to do, in my opinion. Fuel cells, I think, is a really interesting idea. I'm for sure no expert. When I was at GM, I know there was a program on it, and they always worried about, is there enough platinum in the world? The big problem with fuel cells I see is that we already have an electric infrastructure and we don't already have a hydrogen infrastructure. So if we were starting from scratch, who knows which one would be better, but it's hard for hydrogen to compete with electricity unless you have a stationary supply. So, if you're running trucks from, here to there, and you just have one hydrogen fueling station here and one there, maybe that's great. And my sense is, I mean, clearly fuel cells is nowhere near to the level of maturity that lithium batteries are. So there's probably a lot more to be done there, I would guess, but I don't work in that area.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Steve, this is Glenn.
Hi.
I had a question about something that's also kind of a tangent, but when it comes to battery recycling, there's only few companies that actually do that. And do you feel like compared to industry and academia, is this an area where academics could actually make a substantial contribution?
In what?
Battery recycling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a great idea. And the battery industry has no interest in that. I mean, the car companies have a fantasy that they're going to sell all their used batteries to the utilities, and utilities have a fantasy, I don't know what their fantasy is, but you know, in 10 years, this is going to be a massive problem, and I haven't heard anybody come up with a good solution yet. I mean, Elon says he's got it maybe, but I think that would be a great, the world really needs some brand new ideas. That's where academics, to me, should be working, is, something that's going to change the world. That's really important.
Thank you so much.
Hi, can I ask one more question?
As many as you like. If I have to get off, then I have to go listen to Trump, and I really don't want to do that. So please stay.
Yeah, I'm Victoria. I'm from UCSD. I'm also a PhD student, and you mentioned a couple times professors that have kind of bridged the gap and started companies like Yuming Chang or Gleb or Yusui.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when do you think it's worthwhile for a professor to start investing time and resources into trying to turn his idea into something that's like for market and for industry? Like, how do you determine that?
Do you work with Shirley Monk?
No, I'm in Professor Liu's group.
Ping Yu.
Yes.
Say hello for you.
Will do.
Ping used to sort of work at GM, not exactly. I think that for when a professor turns his or her mind to a company, that's an extremely valuable learning experience, because it's the only way they'll get exposed to all of the extraneous junk that actually matters, and then they can start turning their minds to problems that matter. So if you don't know what the problems are, then you end up working on stuff that is wasting everybody's time. And so I think if you're an academic and you want to really have an impact on the real world, create a startup. And even if your startup fails, I think you're going to learn so much about what is actually important in the real world that it'll make you a better scientist, better academic. Almost all little companies fail. So if you go in, start a company, you have to go in knowing that, and the grad students that you kind of stick into the company are going to be left high and dry when the company folds. So you have to be, willing to mentor them through, hard times and that sort of stuff. But I think it's, and it's just an incredibly important part of the ecosystem is professors who are creating startups, because then they're starting to work on problems, the right problems.
Thank you.
Hello, Steve. This is Changmin from the University of Maryland. So I have one question.
Yeah. Oh, I know a bunch of people there. Who do you work for?
I'm a PhD student at Professor Eric Wurzman's group.
Oh, very good guy.
Oh, really?
Okay.
And I have one question regarding a question is, well, what's the difference between industry and academia when people get retired? Yeah, like regarding,
Yeah,
like bonus or, you know.
Things are different. I mean, I feel bad for your generation because all the nice things that we had, like pensions, they're all gone, and job security and all that. So I mean, if you're in academia, you just stay there. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're not doing any research anymore. So you never retire. Why would you ever retire? So I mean, they can take away your lab, but they can't make you leave. So I think retiring from universities is sort of an oxymoron. I think that probably won't last forever because at some point, there's not enough funding to do that. But industry, it's really tough. There's just no such thing anymore as a job for life. So your job is to save up enough money so that when you do retire, you're comfortable. If you're really worried about retiring, then get tenure someplace that's still going to be in business in 40 years. When I went to GM, my thought was, well, in those days, GM was the biggest, most powerful, richest company in the world. I thought, I'll never have to worry about them. Well, they went bankrupt. So, there's no guarantees other than tenure.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Steve. I'm Hong Yi. I'm a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon University.
Oh,
and
who do you work for? I know a few people. Who do you work for?
I'm working with Professor Venkat Viswanathan.
Oh, yeah. He's smart.
Yeah, and before I go to CMU, I work at the CATO as a R&D engineer.
Oh, okay, great.
So I feel the same with you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm from the industry, and now I'm working on like lithium metal batteries, like the next generation batteries.
Right.
So I agree with you that the old paradigm is not working properly, and now I see like they are funding like ARPA-E. I think that's a good paradigm when compared to the old ones.
Somebody told me that in the battery field, other than Gleb, not a single one of their projects has worked out. Is that true?
Yeah, probably. But now I see like in the ARPA-E, like there are like requirements for the scale up. Like that's a good sign.
Right, that's right. I mean, I hope that industry and academia can move closer together. I mean, academia is going to be where the big changes have to come from because companies aren't going to put resources into a long shot project. But the professors, if they want to matter, then they have to understand what it takes to get into production. And so if ARPA-E can help bring industry and academics together, that would be terrific. I don't know. In China, do you feel like industry and academia are working together more or less than here?
Yeah, like they're just like I would say a few professors, like Ouyang, Professor Ouyang, and maybe like it's just a few. I think that's the same thing because like the professors in China, they usually did their PhD in the US, so it's kind of the same thing. Yeah, let's do this right for the lithium metal. I think like any next gen battery, let's do it right as a community.
So lithium metal is another one of these giant step changes that would matter. And so, I think DOE is getting better. So they're funding things like fast charge, like lithium metal, things that would matter. they're not funding SEI. I'm sorry if you're working on SEI, but anyway, I mean, they're not funding things that have basically already been solved. I hope less, and so, you know, there is hope.
Yeah. So last week when I'm watching the Tesla battery day, like
yeah,
as a researcher, I feel behind. I feel I'm behind the industry.
Yeah. Right, and my friends at Tesla say they have very little interest in anything going on in universities because none of it matters.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that academia is good at model. What about a model for the industry? Like,
yeah,
what if we get to model the cell processing,
mm-hmm.
like the manufacturing of anything? Like,
yeah, manufacturing modeling is great. Pack modeling maybe, but you know, people have been beating on cell modeling for 30 years, and you know, you've got 45 adjustable per. I mean, I don't know. You know, the Newman model has provided a ton of insight into what's going on, but at this point, there's just, you know, it's not usable by somebody who's trying to do something new. You just got to redo all of your parameters. This is how I see it. Modeling is the best way for professors in general to get into practice, though. If you have a code that can just be, you know, better way to wind the cell, better way to, I don't know, better way to lay out the factory, you know, that would be great.
Yeah, nice talking to you. I actually listened to your podcast on this topic.
Oh, sorry.
so still a lot of things to learn. The second
Okay.
time I hear this topic.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, nice talking to you. Have a good night.
You too.
Hi, Steve. This is Glenn again.
Hi.
So I just wanted to ask, in regards to all these talk about, you know, the role that academia should play versus what the role industry should play. As a, you know, I already finished my master's, but for other students who are maybe like bachelor students or in grad school right now, how much value do you think the PhD versus a master's versus just a bachelor's would have in industry, given that a lot of this progress being made in commercializing batteries is in like manufacturing, in product engineering and packaging, and in reducing costs and efficiency. So would that PhD have the same value that someone with like only a bachelor's or master's would have in kind of like what's going to be done in the next decade?
So my experience, and remember I worked at big companies, my experience is that the main difference between having a PhD and having a bachelor's or master's, which are sort of combined, is you get treated better if you have a PhD. And by that I mean they assume you get a higher salary, and they assume that it's your responsibility to come up with your own project. If you're a bachelor's or master's, you're probably working for somebody who has a PhD. Now, the good thing about being a master's student is that you're seen as being sort of broad and therefore useful, whereas a PhD guy is very narrow, and if the particular area that he or she is working in goes away, then they're not good for anything because they expect a high salary and they're no better. So it may be safer in the long run to go in as a bachelor's or master's person, and you'll end up with a lower salary, but a safer job. You know, if the company's got any brains, it'll say this guy's smart, and we don't care what his piece of paper says, but a lot of companies aren't that smart. But I think, you know, a PhD is a research, you know, degree. And I mean, if you want to do something, you know, that's not the same as practical application. And if you're really interested in practical application, you know, it's not clear to me that a PhD is the way to go.
If you are interested in doing research in the long run, potentially, even with a master's, and within like, let's say 5 years time in industry, versus someone maybe only 2 years in after a PhD, would you eventually be able to reach the same levels? I mean, depends on the company, like you said, but is there like any limits to what you can do in research with only a master's?
At GM and Ford, there is a limit. It's just stupid, but if you don't have a PhD, you're never going to be, you know, or it's not never, but okay. I mean, I'm hopeful that gradually companies learn that that's stupid, but it's a handicap. It's a handicap. But on the other hand, if you're a PhD, your job is much more, you know, how do you justify your 40% higher salary if really, you know, you're not, you know, your special training isn't actually useful. So the company at some point, they have a bad year and they say, well, you know, who's expendable? Well, that PhD guy there is, you know, costing us 40% more and isn't doing any different. That's how I look at it. I don't know. It may be that also with younger companies that this piece of paper matters less than the old line companies like Ford and GM. I don't really have a better answer.
No, I mean, this is all very insightful. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I really don't want to interrupt this. I think the discussions are very good. And thank you for raising these questions, because I know myself and also many of us here benefits from the conversations. It's like a one-on-one mentorship. This is so good.
Okay. But also please be aware that, like I said at the beginning, that, you know, my opinions are kind of idiosyncratic and don't take them as gospel. They're not necessarily true. They're just true for me. So,
thank you, Steve. I think you're also very humorous.
right.
Yeah, so if we, yeah, I think there are some questions in the chat box. Here, here we have a, yeah, some of them are comments. Yeah, Steve, can you share some of your ideas on Tesla's battery day?
So I think the way to describe Musk is if he makes a claim that he's going to do something in a certain number of years, he will do it, but it won't be in that number of years. So a lot of the technology that he talked about is coming along, and, you know, and in a few years, he said 3, so I figure 6. I mean, I think that the technology, I was just blown away. The part that I was impressed with was the factory, you know, the ability to use the factory more efficiently, more machines per cubic foot. He's thinking in terms of cubic feet instead of square feet. You know, the chemistry, you know, lithium mining, you know, that sounds good. There's other people who are doing that. Chemistry, silicon, you know, maybe he's got a good idea, but there's other people who have good ideas. I think that what matters at that day is that he's claiming to have a huge cost cut. That's one thing. The other thing that's important, there's a lot of push to get rid of cobalt. CATL and Tesla are now collaborating, I think, to put LFP into cars in China. And in 2 years, I think LFP is going to go worldwide. And it's going to push a lot of the other chemistries out. So this is cheap and it's good enough.
Yeah, and you mentioned the patent will expire. So
right. So by 2022 or 3, it's going to just push everything else away unless there's some breakthrough. So I think that the Tesla, what I saw that was great, the bigger form factor is great. The manufacturing is great. The chemistry part of it, I didn't see anything that, I thought was particularly better than anybody else.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Here we have a lot of following up questions in the chat box. So how do you look at the battery swapping? Is that a viable option for public transportation EVs? Like battery swapping, a lot of companies are.
I can't understand how anybody, I probably don't really understand it, but it seems to me that it's a completely impossible idea. Because, so imagine that you're driving your EV and you ran out of juice, so you drive to the swapping station and they take your battery and they put in one that's fully charged. So what that means, more or less, is that while you were driving with your first pack, there was another pack that was sitting there getting charged and waiting for you to show up. And so in the worst case, what that means is that every car, instead of needing one battery pack, needs 2 battery packs. So you just added $10,000 to the price of each car, right? So maybe I'm missing something, but it seems like the very idea of having a large, you can't just have a few of these charged battery packs, because everybody's going to drive in and they're going to demand that there's one waiting there for them. So you need a lot of them. So somehow you're going to have twice as many battery packs, and that's going to cost. That's going to cost twice as much money. So I don't understand the swapping idea. Maybe I'm missing something.
I think that might be a battery as a service. So you rent the battery instead of you purchase a battery.
Oh.
So it's a.
So there's still only one battery. You're not swapping.
Yeah, the money that you paid is for the battery as a service.
Right.
It's actually a shared battery service.
Right, but it doesn't matter if the conventional way is if there's 100 electric cars and there's 100 battery packs. If you're going to do any kind of swapping, then the 100 electric cars have to have 170 battery packs.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So the whole enterprise is going to cost more. So who's going to pay for those extra 70 battery packs? Not the stations. It's going to be the guy. Okay. So when you buy an electric car, you have to buy 1.7 battery packs. Well, that's a lot of money. So it may be that I'm missing something, but I don't understand how changing battery packs makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of shared economics part of the.
Maybe. I don't know how the economics works.
Yeah, thank you for the input. Here we also have a question from Chang Yu. So he asked,
God, you're so good at saying those Chinese names.
I'm Chinese. When companies hire PhD students, what attributes are they looking for? Publications or internship experience?
The best way to get a job is to be an intern. You find a company you like.
Company.
Yeah. You find we hired our own interns all the time. And it's obvious because you have an intern, you like that person, they're smart. Why would you gamble on somebody that might turn out to be a disaster? And so if you can get to be an intern at the company you want, that's the best. If you can be an intern at another company, that's second best, because then at least you can go in saying, I actually understand what a company is about. I worked at, a startup, and we were making cells, and so I know how to make a cell good enough so that it's actually usable. Whereas you come out of a graduate group and you know how to make a cell, but it only lasts 8 cycles and it only get, you don't know, right? So I think any internship is great. I don't think most companies care that much about your publication record. the most important thing is your interview. So first of all, you have to get an interview, which means you've done a lot of networking. And then when you go for the interview, your talk is 40 minutes long, max. It's aimed at people who are smart but aren't necessarily battery experts. You show them that, you show them that you're able to convey what you've done clearly, because as a person working in that company, you're going to be called on to make a presentation to the boss or to the boss's boss. They need to know that you can do a good job. Part of what I have done with a lot of people is I'll listen to their presentation, and then I'm happy to give suggestions on what to do better. And I think the biggest single mistake that grad students make is they think that, so they spent 5 years on their PhD. 4 of them was to solve this one problem because the electrode didn't stick to the current collector, and they think that's interesting, but it's not. So they give a talk and half of it's on that and nobody cares. So it's nice to have some perspective. There's some your project has some grand vision, and that's what you want to talk about, and not the thing that you're proudest of, because nobody cares about that.
Yeah, thank you for your inputs from the.
By the way, every talk on the first or second or third slide should say, here are the goals. And on the last slide, you summarize your conclusions, and by an amazing coincidence, all of your goals have been met in the last slide. Okay.
So people are interested in
you write your talk backwards. First, you write, what did you learn? And then, whatever you learned, those were your goals. So nobody has to know that all those information came by accident. Okay.
Yeah, it is very interesting. We always start from A, but we end up with B, but telling people that actually your goal is to go, your originally target is we want to achieve
you ended
D.
Up, that's what your goal was.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. That's very good. Yeah, very interesting. So here also another question from Athena Young, where she asked, why do we need a high C rate lithium-ion battery? Many researchers presented rate capability tests of battery like 0.05 C to 20 C or above that. In the articles which I read, they just explained high rate battery was needed for electric vehicles and energy storage system. Except for fast charging, could you explain the importance of high C rate batteries? Thanks.
Well, you just answered the question. It's fast charging. So usually, unless you're what is it, a Model S Plaid or something, and you're going 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds, you don't really care about how fast you can discharge. It's charging. It's fast charging. There is another factor that's also important, I should say, and that is with regenerative braking. So when you put the brakes on, you're trying to convert as much kinetic energy as you can into electrical energy and store that. And so you've got a lot of megajoules of kinetic energy, and your braking only lasts 5 seconds, and somehow you have to put 5 So what actually happens is a lot of the energy simply can't get into the battery. It's wasted. And so if you have high charging rate, that lets you be more efficient. But that's less of an important issue than just charging at a station. And if you look at if you're hoping that electric vehicles become universally accepted, if you look at the potential problems, safety is good enough, cost needs more, but it's good enough. Life is good enough. Range is good enough. The only really big problem now is fast charge. And so you can ask, is the average person willing to spend 30 minutes charging their car? And if the answer is no, then electric vehicles simply are not going anywhere. And so that's a big issue. By the way, there's some tricks that companies can use to make it seem like they've got fast charging. So for example, Audi has a gigantic battery and not a very good range. So what does that mean? It means they can charge all the way up. I mean, why do they have such terrible range? It's because their maximum stated charge is 65%. All right, well, so now, yeah, we can charge all the way up in 20 minutes, but they're really only going to 65%. So, I mean, that's a game that you can play. There's a lot of those.
Yeah, a lot of tricks here. Another question from Hao Yuan. Can hydrogen fuel vehicles become equal substitutes for EVs?
Now, how did you know that it's Hao Yuan and not, how did you know what tone to use?
I might be wrong. It might be Hao Yuan.
Right, okay.
Hao Yuan, can you help to clarify how to spell your name?
Right. Okay. Actually, I tried to learn Chinese once and the tones killed me, so I gave up. So I'm sorry, the question is about fuel cell cars compared to...
the hydrogen fuel vehicles, can it become the equal substitutes for EVs?
I think if it were purely a technology issue, then maybe. I don't think there's anything intrinsic to batteries that's better than fuel cells. I think the real problem is that you can't get hydrogen. I live in the Bay Area and there's only like 2 hydrogen stations or 3 hydrogen stations. And so as long as there's no hydrogen available, nobody's going to buy hydrogen cars. Now, of course, you could always build a hydrogen infrastructure, but why would anybody do that when we already have an electric infrastructure?
Probably it's the case in Japan. I know Japan has invested a lot on hydrogen fuel cell because of because every country is different based on the natural resources they have, all the infrastructures they have.
There's actually, I saw a presentation by some people from China. There's, I don't remember, there's 3 cities in China that are very near each other and that are big producers of steel. And well, I call them cities. They only have like 5 million people, so you probably think of them as little towns. But anyway, the steel manufacturers produce an enormous amount of hydrogen waste. And so they were quite interested not only in hydrogen fuel cells, but even hydrogen internal combustion engines, because they got all this hydrogen and nothing to do with it. And so you can certainly have, and you know, it maybe hydrogen is good for storage for the grid. I don't know, but for cars, it's just got this big problem of infrastructure, and I don't see there's no driving force to put in a hydrogen infrastructure if we already have an electric one. That's how I see it. I heard a rumor that the reason Toyota is in favor of fuel cells was because 10 years ago, they spent $1 quadrillion on nickel metal hydride batteries. And so they hated the idea of lithium batteries coming along. And so they resisted lithium batteries, and they're still resisting lithium batteries, only now they're calling it hydrogen. So, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like company like Toyota, they have kind of like sunk cost. They already spent so much money on the fuel cell research.
Somebody says that's not true, so that I believe you. I just heard that story.
No, I'm also just hearing gossips from here and there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
My apologies to Toyota.
All right. Any other questions from our audience? I think it's very interesting night. A lot of deep conversations here.
As long as you don't mind sparing you from watching the debate, I can ask more questions.
Please. I don't want to go back there. My wife is watching that, and I told her I don't want to see anything. But okay.
So another thing to question is, let's say you are currently early entering like the industry market, Do you think it's more fruitful to be learning these alternative chemistries for lithium batteries instead of studying lithium-ion batteries, or is that fundamental lithium-ion battery knowledge still like really important to know? But you could still learn this in other alternative chemistry.
I mean, I think, you know, you need a good grounding in electrochemistry and in material science or something like that. And then wherever you go, you'll just learn what you need to know. I mean, sometimes a company will hire you because they need somebody who knows how to wind 18650s, but you know, a lot of times they can't find the guy who knows how to wind it, so they just hire whoever's smart, and they figure you'll learn, and then you follow what your company thinks is important. And as long as, I mean, you have to be flexible, you have to be willing to learn something. You know, it's really discouraging to spend 5 years in a field and then change fields and you go to a conference and you don't know one person, not even one. But that's what you got to do sometimes. And then, so you let your company decide. I wouldn't try, especially a PhD, you know, do whatever excites you. Do a project where you're going to excel, and you're willing and happy to work, you know, around the clock, because, you know, and then, you know, convince your boss that you're smart and convince other companies you're smart. You'll learn.
Thank you, Steve. Sorry.
There is a caveat to that. So like in 2010, if you knew how to spell the word lithium, you got a job offer from every university in the country. But usually it's not that. So usually you just want to be smart.
Yeah, smart, learn fast. So yeah. And here another question from Hao Yuan. The state of California just outlaw the purchase of new gasoline-powered car from 2035. What impact do you think it will have on the car industry? And do you think other states or countries will follow?
I don't think it'll have any impact. California, about every decade or so, California passes some emissions rule, and then everybody ignores it. So this must be their third law that's requiring electric vehicles. You know, electric vehicles will come when they're ready, and there's got to be some demand for them. California will push 15 years. I don't know. I don't think it's symbolic.
But there are like many other countries, especially in Europe and
Europe
China.
Is different. Right.
Yeah,
So Europe is different. And China.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's places where people are serious about electric vehicles. I think in the United States, I don't think this country is serious about EV.
Yeah, also, I'm not sure about that because we see those very ambitious claims that companies or countries will phase out all the internal combustion engine cars by like 10 years ago, they say by 2020, and then they push it to 2030 and then 2040.
Yeah, I mean, that's true there too. But my sense is that Europe and China are way more serious about electrifying the fleet than the US is. I mean, you look at GM, Ford, and Chrysler.
The big three, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the big three, I mean, you know, they're doing nothing on electric vehicles. I mean, GM came out with a Bolt 5-6 years ago. They've done nothing. They haven't updated it. They've never advertised it. And so, you know, the future is going to belong to the startups, I think. There's a lot in China. There's a bunch in the US. You know.
What do you think of these big three? Like they're trying to reform themselves. Like they have for I know in Ford they have a department of called Future. Like they are putting money and investment, doing research on AI, autonomous driving, batteries. How do you think these big guys will they save themselves, or it's?
So I was at Ford from about 1998 until 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, Ford came out with the Escape, which was a hybrid. And so Toyota came out with the Prius.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the next 10 years, the only competitor in the market was Ford. With the, they came out with their hybrid. And within Ford, everyone was so proud. You know, we are leading, okay, Toyota was first, but we're right behind and compared to the rest of the world. And then they never followed up. And the reason is that they were losing their shirts making electrified vehicles, and that's still the case. And so if you go back to, let's say, 2016, 17, 18, the GM, Ford, and Chrysler were making more money than God. They were just printing money. And they let their electric programs languish, practically die. I mean, there's nothing there. Now, maybe they're getting serious, but now they don't have any money. So they're, you know, I mean, they're now COVID and all, you know, the whole world is in a recession. Where are they going to get money? And so I don't know. I don't have a good feeling about their future. Maybe, you know, Volkswagen is serious because of their diesel problem. And so maybe Volkswagen and Ford will combine. And, you know.
Wow, that's very crazy.
Really crazy. It's such a tragedy in my mind.
And they also have to fight against their, I'm not sure whether you have watched the documentary called American Factory. Like they have to fight against the union.
So, you know, that's what the auto industry wants you to believe. And it used to be that they could make the case. In about 1987 or 8 or something like that, GM had a factory in California, Fremont, that made Camaros. And it was the worst factory that GM had. Their absentee rate was 10 or 15%. They were having union strikes right and left. The quality was the worst in GM. And GM said, look at how bad the union is. So then GM sold the plant to Toyota. And about 4 or 5 years later, the absentee rate was 2%. It was the highest quality cars made in the United States. The factory, nobody was going on strike. And it was the same union and the same people.
So management.
I mean, they didn't even change workers. It was United Auto Workers, same people. So after that, I mean, I saw examples where the union was very obstructive, but after that, I think it's very hard to say this is the union's fault. I think GM did not know how to run factories. Toyota did.
Good input, Steve. This is how experience and fact speaks. And also, I think, we have so many questions in the chat box.
Great.
Is postal recycling of are you okay with the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably pretty late.
These you guys are the hardcore now, though.
we are all EV battery enthusiasts.
So yeah, your answer raise up more questions.
Yeah.
Your answer give people more feeling asking questions.
Wonderful.
So, Steve, is disposal recycling of EV battery a serious challenge for the EV manufacturers? And also, from Athena. That is why China's lithium battery recycling is good. Oh, I think people
Athena,
are chatting
probably.
in the, oh, Athena. I'm sorry, Athena.
Probably.
The
Yeah, I think that's a big problem, and I think
Mhm.
nobody wants to work on it because there's no business right now. I mean, if you opened a factory that could recycle batteries, what would you do all day? There's no batteries coming in. And so, and then you got these people like Jeff Don or somebody coming up with million-mile batteries that, you know, so when is there going to be a need for recycled batteries? Someday there's going to be a need, but right now, figuring out how to get somebody to invest today in something that won't have a business for 15 years, that's really tough. And so I think it's not happening. Now maybe, you know, in China, they could just say we're doing it and then they'll just do it. But it's really hard in the US.
That makes sense. It might be a good business after like 20 years.
It might
when
be a
the
great
first
business.
batch of, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, timing is important. All right, here another question. Can hydrogen energy storage replace battery storage during low PV generation period?
You know, I'm so uneducated about hydrogen, but here's what I think. You got two options. You have a photovoltaic. This is about PV, right? Photovoltaics? That was the question?
PV,
okay.
yeah.
So you got a photovoltaic, and out of the photovoltaic comes electricity. And now you have two choices. You can take that electricity and you can run your house or charge your car, or you can use that electricity to make hydrogen and then put that hydrogen into a fuel cell, which makes electricity, and then you run your house. And all of my instincts say that that second way is crazy. Now, I mean, maybe transportation, maybe it's cheaper to, you know, maybe you can make hydrogen with photovoltaics in Arizona and then transport the hydrogen to New England, and maybe it's cheaper to transport hydrogen than to transport electricity. I don't know, but that would surprise me. But just for the sake of converting to hydrogen, other than using it as a transportation medium, I don't see the point.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're a let's say you're a dam, and you're generating more electricity than you can use. Okay, so now you got to do something with that, and maybe generating hydrogen is cheaper than generating electricity and storing electricity. Maybe, then it makes sense. But to turn photovoltaics into hydrogen, I don't understand. Unless somebody's come up with a way of, you know, photon in, hydrogen molecule out in one step. Maybe I think there are people who want to do that, and maybe that's good. But just to generate electricity in order to, you know, okay.
Yeah, the energy efficiency is so low.
You have to be losing.
Yeah.
You have to lose. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So another, I think Athena has a lot of passions on Athena. Sorry,
okay.
so bad at pronouncing name. Athena. How to conduct battery sizing for wind farms and PV farms. All these are alternative energy storage questions.
I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, if you said, all right, tomorrow I'm going to wave my magic wand and tomorrow the entire country is going to be running on photovoltaics and batteries, would you make one photovoltaic for every house? Would you make one for every block? Would you make one giant one in Arizona? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a really interesting question. But there's two issues. One is it might be that the most efficient thing to do would be to just cover the state of Arizona with photovoltaics. And but then the trouble is if Arizona falls into the ocean or something, then the whole country is blacked out. So I mean, there may be some trade-offs. So
yeah, I think it needs a very
that's a really good question, and I think life cycle analysis. How do you actually do these things in a way that's really right? I think that's a big question, really important question. But I don't know who would pay to know the answer to your question, Athena. Maybe an electric utility. I don't know. But maybe they want to make giant plants because, I have photovoltaics on my roof, and the utility doesn't really make any money off of me. So maybe they may have their own desires on how to size things. But anyway, I think it's a really important question.
Mm.
So I have a question to shift gears a little bit. What are the companies that you would rank as most exciting for you in the next couple of years to, I guess, make pretty big leaps in the EV market?
Yeah, the startups.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's Toyota and there's everybody else. If you really are interested in, well, so there's a difference between interested in EVs and interested in batteries.
Sorry,
So,
batteries, but batteries that could be used for
yeah.
EVs and other
So then after, Tesla, then you're talking about, Samsung and Panasonic and CATL and BYD and, all of these giant, all these giant corporations. They're going to lead the way. They're the ones that are going to cut the price. And, my friends at Toyota are just having a ball. They love what they're doing. It's so much fun because Musk is willing to shoot the moon and, spend big money on things that are crazy. And so it's just a wonderful place to work. Who knows how that's going to be. Among the car companies, I think Volkswagen is serious. I think, the Chinese, well, all the startups, of course, are serious. I mean, there's sort of BYD is kind of in between, right? They're kind of like Tesla. They make batteries and they make cars. But I kind of have the feeling that BYD is a battery company and, they stuck some chairs and a steering wheel on top of their battery and wheels. I'm not sure. Of the big, Toyota is so disappointing to me. I mean, they're the ones that should be leading. They should be the world leader in tech. They should be where Tesla is. They had infinite resources. They were they led in hybrids, and they just, dropped it. I don't know. I mean, if Ford and Volkswagen tie up, they have some collaboration now. I mean, maybe a Ford Volkswagen company would be smart. The big German companies, BMW and Mercedes, they do a lot of really great battery research. I don't know what their future is, but they have really, really excellent labs. In fact, yeah. And then Honda, the other big Japanese companies, I don't know, Hyundai, they're still working on hydrogen. I don't know. I mean, all these car companies could have been where Tesla is, and they're not. And, I'm just really disappointed. I think what you need is, if you want to work for a legacy car company, you need one that's so wealthy that they can afford to invest $10 billion in electric vehicles, and also $10 billion in IC engines in case EVs don't pan out. And so what's happened is most of the legacy car companies, they say, well, we have to keep, investing in IC engines because that's where all our money is. And we just don't have enough money left over to invest $10 billion in electric. Well, so maybe there's some car companies that are so wealthy, Toyota, maybe BMW can do that.
My follow-up question is, with Tesla's rise, even if their factories are going at 100%, what do you predict their role is going to be like in terms of the market share of all the EVs in the near future?
So maybe they drop down to 10% of the EV market, but if the EV market is 40% of the world in 10 years, then they're the size of, they're the size of Honda, or I mean, they're a big car company then, and they have the capability of making infinite money, especially if they're the low cost producer. I mean, I think companies like Lucid and NIO has a really good car, I think. From what I understand, a lot of the Chinese cars are not going to make it out of China because they're not going to meet Western standards. But I think NIO will, and it actually Volvo is now a Chinese company. They're going to do really well, I think, in the West. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to be the CEO of a legacy car company right now. But maybe a company like Rivian, or Lucid. Maybe those are going to be the most exciting companies to be at, because they're still unformed, and you go to a company like that, and you have an impact on the company because you're still 1% of the entire company. At Tesla, they've already got, I don't know, 10,000 employees, or I don't know how many they've got. So your chance for an impact is small. And why wouldn't all these other companies do great? I mean, maybe Tesla simply can't meet the demand, and it's not coming from GM. So
I guess a follow-up to that would be also, what's your take on solid-state batteries? And if there are competing chemistries that meet pretty similar specs, and they can, let's say other companies are going with a different chemistry and Tesla's sticking with their low-cost lithium-ion battery, do you feel like the market would, there would be enough market share for both companies to thrive, or both multiple automakers to all thrive? Or is this going to be something that is going to shift toward one being a winner that dominates?
So first of all, from my understanding, the whole point of a solid state battery is lithium metal. So if you're not going to get to lithium metal, I think you're wasting your time. It's a lot of money, a lot of effort, and big deal. So you're really asking, are there ever going to be lithium metal batteries? And if there are they going to be solid state, or are they going to still be liquid? And somebody comes up with some way to make. So if it's possible to make a lithium metal battery with a liquid, then that's going to clobber solid state batteries, because solid state is just expensive, I think. If we say that that liquid electrolytes will never work with lithium metal, which is plausible, then if you look at the performance now of the solid electrolytes, the sulfur batteries are miles ahead of the oxide batteries in terms of, I mean, you get 3 cycles out of LLZO and you publish that, I guess. There's big hurdles and big payoff if you can get to lithium metal. This is a perfect kind of project for academics to work on, I think, as opposed to like lithium sulfur, which to me always seemed kind of dumb because the volumetric energy density of lithium sulfur is worse than lithium ion. So why would a car company care about lithium sulfur? But solid state, lithium metal, I haven't seen anything stupid about that. Another big idea could be anyway, XU, who's one of my heroes. So he's got this, he calls it a water and salt. Have you heard about what he's doing? Aqueous batteries. And I mean, that could be a big deal, because if you really can get rid of all your organic solvents, that could save a lot of money maybe. So I think there's some roles for academics to revolutionize the field, and maybe solid state is a good shot. I've got my own solution to solving the lithium penetration problem, but if it turns out not to work, then that's still a problem. So anyway, they got their problems.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think it's already 2 hours plus, and then I feel let's give Steve some time to. Yeah, I think Steve, you
I
probably
think the debate must be over by now.